Welcome to Master B2B's Friday 15. Our music took a second there. I think, Andy, the band was asleep this morning.
They had a bit late night gig, so it makes
Yeah, I
sense.
guess so, right? Here we are, folks. Friday 15, early September, just past Labor Day. My name is Brian Beck. I'm here with Andy Hoare, my partner in the Master B2B Thought Leadership Series. Welcome, everyone. Excited that you're here today. And we have a great set of topics we're going to be talking about today. This is a hot one, Andy, talking about inside sales versus e-commerce, which we hear a lot about, AI and all these things happening in the world. But before we jump in on that, we have some breaking news. Andy, I don't know if you saw this yesterday. eMarketer came out with some data that was actually published created by Google. And it talked about CTOs being now responsible for driving the Gen AI strategy at businesses. They surveyed, hundreds of companies and found that it wasn't the business side which was driving the AI strategy at companies. It's actually the technical function. CTO, 59% said the CTO. CIO followed that, followed by the CEO. So this is really, it's still at the C level and it's technical. What's your reaction?
Yeah, not surprising. It's considered a game-changing technology, but most importantly, a technology. And so companies, this is early in the curve. We saw the same thing with e-commerce. I'll bet if you go way back in the Wayback Machine, you hear the same thing about CRM when it first came out, despite the fact that CRM is clearly owned by the business or marketing side of the house now, or even the sales, but not technical. But it's a technology, air quotes, and because of that, it goes to the CTO. But I assure you, within the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to be distributed across the organization. CTOs might have a sort of an oversight responsibility, but this is way too important to be put in the hands of just the technical team.
Yeah, although what's interesting, Andy, is we find a lot of folks. I think about people like Andy Goodfellow at Zorro, owned by Grainger. They're technical leaders, but they're business minded, right? So in the sense, there's more of that creeping into the CTO, CIO role, is this responsibility for business and awareness of the business needs. But yeah, I agree with you. I think ultimately there has to be a real business use case for this stuff, and that has to come from the business side. So, today I think it's, there's more concern about the security of AI and, how do you manage this thing that everyone's sort of afraid of a little bit. Right. And so that's what's dominating, it seems, kind of where it's being managed. Anyhow, we'll see how this evolves. I just thought it was really, really interesting because, the CMO is at the bottom of the list. Only 18% said that was the role responsible for driving Gen AI strategy. So anyhow, interesting stuff. Let's get into our topic today, which is e-commerce replacing inside sales in B2B commerce? Now, we're just talking about AI, and we think about AI's implications for e-commerce, for digital, for making processes more efficient, not only for the commerce side, but also for kind of answering questions, addressing some of those common use cases that traditionally inside sales has addressed. And we, kind of thinking about what are some of those traditional roles of inside sales. Starting here, Andy, thinking about what do they typically do? So things like lead generation or prospecting, outbound prospecting for new leads for a company, for a B2B company, or handling inbound leads. So a company calls in and they're handling the leads to either direct that to an outside salesperson or perhaps close the sale, or handling another role is handling transactional or one-time purchases or things like reorders, versus maybe a more complex sale that requires someone who is looking at the configuration or the application of the product in the field. So handling those transactional orders, serving smaller or long tail customers, someone who just wants to buy one thing from the business and they just want to get it done, get it out. Inside sales typically handles that, or even handling simpler questions or problems. We do have, of course, technical support with a lot of companies with inside sales. They sometimes tend to be technical, but more routine questions that don't require you being in the field looking at the application with the customer, for example. These are the traditional roles of inside sales. But Andy, you found this article that McKinsey recently did, a study that talked about inside sales versus some of the other selling functions. You want to speak to this a bit?
Yeah. So the headline here is that McKinsey found that inside sales typically cover 50% of the prospects I'm sorry, 4x the number of prospects at 50% of the cost of a traditional field rep. So backing up a second, so inside sales function, I think if we went back and looked at the history of it, it's something
Yeah.
that grew out of a sort of a fault in the model around the outside sales rep who is busy and expensive and traditionally well trained, right?
Right.
That person couldn't take every phone call and qualify every prospect and handle, especially the long tail customers who are infrequent purchasers, small tickets. So they needed a function that would bridge the gap between that and nothing. And so inside sales comes along, which are typically, I think, historically, people who were going to be outside sales reps were early in their career, right? That was the idea. But digital, like everything, it upended this model as well.
Yep.
And what we have seen, I know you and I have seen this, is that the inside sales rep has become a new sort of monster in the organization here. It's a really powerful function if used properly, and it's because technology has enabled it. This is what McKinsey found out. 4x the number of prospects at 50% of the cost, because the outside sales person maybe has to travel someplace
Right.
or has to have longer, deeper conversations. And sometimes those conversations are wasted. You have somebody who's very expensive, 6-figure income, well-trained, who's taking phone calls about, onesies and twosies and answering simple questions. Well, e-commerce has solved a lot of that by answering those simple questions. And then the inside salespeople have access to the same information that the outside sales reps have. So basically, the bottom line here is that a well-armed inside sales rep can now effectively answer the same level of questions that the outside sales rep can. Now, people are going to disagree with us on that. And yes, experience matters, et cetera. But technology and information has changed this game. And that's what McKinsey found. These numbers are pretty staggering. I mean, they increased revenue, improved productivity for the field reps because they're giving the outside sales reps better qualified prospects, but probably fewer of them. So this, to me, requires a rethink of the model.
Well, yeah, and some of the other data here for those listening on our podcast, 80% inside sales can touch 80% of accounts. And so just the coverage, because you're not sitting in a car or traveling or whatever, bringing donuts.
Yeah, having lunch.
Yeah, but again, there is value to those things, and I think that's where we have to strike the balance. But what's fascinating, Andy, is that the buyer, B2B buyer, and we talk about this a lot, has changed. If fact of the matter is, 74% of millennials avoid sales calls and outreach efforts. That's some data from Activate Marketing Services from 2 years ago. And these millennials, by the way, everyone thinks they're young kids. They're not. They're now in their 40s. These are the majority of buyers. And even Gen Z now is they're entering the workforce. So the buyer is changing out from under us.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that there's a difference between inbound and outbound. You talked about that a little bit earlier here in the broadcast. The outbound is, reaching out to people and calling them, contacting them. I think that's where this statistic is particularly relevant. People are not taking phone calls. I don't even take phone calls now. If my phone rings and it's a number, even a number I recognize, I just wait for them to leave a message and then I'll look at the message later. So,
absolutely,
we're not taking phone calls. Who's taking phone calls exactly, right? So there's a trend away from that. So, millennials are not different from us now. Anybody who's got access to technology is pretty much rejecting the idea of receiving these. So the outbound function, it's the inbound one that's really interesting. So let's say somebody has a question. They contact the company through the portal. Maybe they send an email through the e-commerce site. Who does that go to? Does that go to customer service? Does that go to inbound, or does that go to inside sales? It certainly will go to outside sales. So presumably it will go to inside sales or customer service. In many cases, a well-informed customer service agent, just like a well-informed inside sales agent, can actually answer the question. And if they have any training, they might even be able to close the deal. I speculated about this with Death of a B2B Salesman 10 years ago, that I thought that with information and technology, customer service reps and inside sales reps could be a lot more effective. And I think that's what we're seeing now, to the point where maybe that inside sales rep will get back to you, answer your question, and you say, great, let's close the deal. Do you then have to pass them to an outside sales rep who that person has no relationship with? Or can the inside person or the customer service person close the deal? That's an
Yes,
interesting question.
it is, Andy, but it kind of misses the point of the whole broadcast, which is e-commerce going to take the place of these sales
Well,
functions?
because we didn't get to the kicker here.
Well,
So
what is the kicker?
we
Go ahead.
talked about inside sales, we talked about customer service, and we talked about outside sales. There's a new kid in town, and it's called the AI chatbot.
That's right.
And that's really typically run by the e-commerce team. So let's take the AI chatbot and insert them in the process. Somebody, asks a question on the website. The chatbot actually replies, answers the question, and says, would you like to, book this transaction? And if the person says yes, and never touched inside sales, and never touched customer service, and it never got to outside sales. So that's another dimension here where you could argue that as that becomes more prevalent and better, and we've seen it ourselves, the inside sales rep, customer service rep, outside sales rep model, or the sales model, is going to be challenged by AI. Now, that said, I don't think AI is going to be able to answer everything. And for larger purchases, people may want to talk to somebody, but
Yep.
do they need to talk to the expensive outside sales rep, or can they talk to customer service, or in this case, inside sales? I would argue yes.
Possibly, but I mean, you wrote a bit about this, following in the great footsteps of gentlemen here. Those of you listening on the podcast, we have a couple pictures here of two very handsome men, Mr. Andy Hoare, standing next to someone called Mr. Arthur Miller, and they both wrote all about this thing called the death of a salesman. So, Andy, you wrote this when you were at Forrester, and you had some theories behind. You're talking now. I think it seems to me some of the things you talked about are becoming closer to reality. But let's talk about, does e-com take over, or does it supercharge inside sales? If we look back at then think about those functions that we talked about at the beginning of the session today, can e-com handle these things? The first one on the list was lead generation or outbound prospecting. And if you think about things like digital marketing, or ways to, the fact that a lot of today's buyers are going online first to research products, our own research shows that, isn't that replacing the outbound marketing?
Well, plus we know that you can actually do personalized messaging using AI to people, even on places like LinkedIn, where you think they're actually talking to you personally. And so that's all generated by the e-com and the marketing team, which doesn't require somebody typing the message, which does, again, undermine the argument of inside sales.
That's right. How about handling inbound leads? Somebody comes in.
I think we just addressed that one, right? You can reroute it through the chatbot and problem solved.
Or handling a purchase, like a transactional or one-time purchase, such as a reorder. Doesn't e-com do that if the buyer knows what they want better than anyone else?
That's the most compelling use case right now, is the reorders, where you just put them on a subscription plan, right? And they just reorder plan.
Or easily, pull up their reorders once they log into their e-commerce account. They see what they've ordered in the past. I need this widget, and there it is. Boom, ordered again. 5 seconds later. It's very Amazon-esque, right? How about serving smaller or long tail customers? Can't e-commerce take that on from inside sales?
Well, it depends on what it is, but this is a perennial problem for every company, which is, how do you handle the low frequency, small ticket, long tail customers who, they're not generating enough revenue to justify paying an outside salesperson who's commissioned.
Or an inside sales.
That falls into the inside sales, customer service, e-commerce portal. Yep.
And then, and handling simple questions. Can't e-commerce or a website handle, particularly now super powered with AI, handle some of these simple problems or questions? What is the role of the inside sales rep if e-com can handle a lot of these things? Any thoughts, Andy?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what the question is. If it's a risky purchase, if it's one where it's a very customized purchase, then you're going to want to talk to somebody. It's an expensive product. You probably want to talk to somebody.
Yep.
But this reminds me of e-commerce. I remember back in the day, they used to say nobody's going to buy anything over $100 online. People are buying
Right.
making $1 million purchases online now. So I'm not sure that's an effective argument. I do think, though, that especially in B2B, where there's such specificity about what you're buying, like that part has to work in that machine, people may not trust the AI, which might hallucinate that, but it's going to get better. And I think the trend is definitely in the direction of e-commerce and AI taking over a lot of these functions for sure.
Well,
We're
it's
just not there yet.
this is an up leveling, and I think that honestly, I think this is going to be a a balance. It's going to be inside and outside sales empowered with digital. It's already happening. There's a quote I'm going to read from the McKinsey study that we were citing earlier. B2B sellers have achieved up to 20% revenue gains by redefining go-to-market through inside and hybrid sales. The successful inside sales model relies on qualified account managers and leverages digital solutions to optimize sales strategy and outreach through a range of channels. What they're saying is really that, and I think, my opinion, Andy, I think you'd agree, is that as we look at those functions in inside sales they've traditionally handled, those things can become better and easier. We can free up time from the inside sales team to focus on higher value tasks where there actually is some consultative selling required. Some technical knowledge, some application knowledge, which can be delivered via phone or web collaboration or Zoom or what have you. And we've seen this in our community too. We asked this question and we got some reactions on our LinkedIn poll questions around this. James Wallen had a really interesting point. James is the vice president of sales at Credit Key, and he said, and he's selling, he's in B2B, right? I mean, they're selling B2B just like product companies are. He said order placement is being pushed to e-commerce, changing the ratio of accounts that can be covered by both inside and outside sales. A lot of accounts that would now have today have an assigned sales rep, field rep, are now being covered by inside sales, and many accounts that are being directed to inside sales are now being pushed to e-com. So it's kind of a rebalancing, I think, and making it more efficient and putting the buyer at the core of this. How does the buyer want to be served? And providing different options. Those that need technical consultation in the sale, okay, they'll call inside sales.
Well, what's interesting about that evolution is that you can also map that. It correlates with the least amount of friction.
Right.
An outside sales rep, you got to wait for them to call you back. Inside sales rep, they're 24/7 or they're there on the phone. You can talk to them in real time. You don't have to wait for them to call you back. In e-com, there is no calling back. It's 24/7, 365, right. And you can interact with it on your terms. So that's not a coincidence.
Absolutely. And Jack Moberger, director of sales engagement, enablement at Algolia, another company we've done a lot of work with over the years, said this, which I think was interesting. Data proliferation and great analytics widen the funnel for the best offerings. And the inside and outside sales teams grow like weeds because they're able to chase down customers they would have thought to target. So that's fascinating. So it's not just about the process and the efficiency and eliminating friction. It's also about widening the top of the funnel and getting more leads in so that the business can just close more revenue, right? So interesting point from Jack. Thank you, Jack, for your comments there. That's a really interesting one. And so, we also asked our community on a LinkedIn poll about this. And this was fascinating, Andy. We asked them, are you increasing or decreasing your use of inside sales in the age of digital? And 72% said they were increasing their use of inside sales, which is counter to what you might suspect, your death of the salesman argument, that, folks are putting more into this. What do you, this function, what do you make of this?
Well, we didn't ask the question, are you increasing or decreasing your use of outside sales in the age of digital?
That's true. Yeah, that's right.
That's a more pertinent question for death of a B2B salesman. I bet that number is a lot closer to 50% or lower. Now, I think there's the emergence of this, you said supercharged, I'd say well-armed, younger, digital savvy sales representative who's using information and technology to answer questions and close deals. It's that closed deals part. The information is now pervasive. The question is, who's closing the deal and how? That used to be something that only outside salespeople could do, but I think we're finding more and more. In fact, there's even research we didn't present today that says that people trust inside salespeople more than outside salespeople.
Well, it's fascinating. Let's check this out. So, Jared, thank you for your comment. Jared Abelson from Simpson Strong Tie, who's their head of e-commerce. He said, in our industry, customers date their outside rep, but marry their inside rep. That's fascinating, Jared. Thank you for that.
I did not see that, but yes, that's exactly what I just said, isn't it? Because the research does show that when they ask them, who do you trust gives you better answers, they always say inside sales rep, probably because of the perception that those people aren't trying to sell something. Of course they are, but that they're more of an honest broker, like a customer service rep would be. But over time, that's better for the sales relationship, like Jared just said. If you're going to buy more from who you trust more, right?
That's right. That's right. All right. As usual, Andy, we're running past our Friday 15 here. So let's get to some of our announcements. We do have a State of B2B e-commerce report released this summer. Folks, you can download that. It's free. You can see all these different trends we're talking about. We talk about AI in there and other things. You go to our website, masterb2b.com, and /2024 State of E-commerce report. Just push dashes between those words and you'll get the report. We also have our roundtables starting next week in Chicago, all over the country, folks. We'll do some report outs from those as we go through them this fall here on Friday 15. But we're in Chicago, New York, Atlanta, LA, Dallas, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Minneapolis, and Denver. Go to our website, masterb2b.com. Look for future events, and you'll be able to sign up there. If you're a practitioner, they're free. These are 2-hour roundtable discussions followed by dinner at lovely locations all over the U.S. Hope to see you there. We have our Master B2B forum. Want to remind folks, go to masterb2b.com forum, and you can sign up there. This is a private practitioner-only network that is, people can share ideas. It's free to join. Again, practitioner only. For that, please, you can sign up right on our site. And finally, I want to remind folks that all of our Friday 15 episodes are available on your favorite podcast platform. So suggest you take the, download us there, listen to us while you're doing laundry or driving your car or riding your bike or whatever you do. So thanks, folks, for listening again today. Thanks for your comments. I had a lot of good comments today. And Andy, any final words before we part on our Friday 20 plus?
Yeah, one thing we didn't mention that maybe I'll leave the audience with here is, what's the career path for an inside sales rep? Used to be become an outside sales rep, but if there are fewer of those needed, then what does that person become? I think we've heard stories. Master B2B's Jared Blank even mentioned that his wife had an inside sales rep who was, highly valued, and she was sad to see him go. But the question is, where do they go? Like, if they don't become an outside sales rep, what happens next? So that used to be the question we asked about outside sales reps. Now we're asking about inside. That I think is revealing.
It is. So, yep, that has a lot to do with comp structures and things like that too. But great thought to end us on. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll catch you next week on our next Friday 15. Thanks for listening, folks.